this your game? Huh? Is this your game?
Rebel Moon Part 2 was released over the weekend on Netflix, so let's review. So Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, it's basically the third act of this whole Rebel Moon story arc. In which in the first film, it was basically like Seven Samurai. They were getting a band together, and now that band's together, this is the movie where they come together to protect people, make sure the harvest stays going, and take care of this evil galactic empire that's controlling everybody. All right, look, there's a couple of kinds of people in the world. People who didn't watch the first Rebel Moon, and people that watched Rebel Moon once and really didn't care for it afterwards to the point where they are forgetting about it. Now me, I'll admit, going into part 2, I kind of forgot everything because I just did not care to go rewatch the first film because the first film, it was just so bad, I just didn't care, and I didn't care for this film. But I am a fair person. I went into this with an open mind, and some of the action was pretty decent, I'll say, at least for a Zack Snyder film. But all the issues I've had with this movie, it pretty much carries on into this movie. So, a pretty short review. I'm not going to spend too much time with this. I wish Zack Snyder would spend less time with these two movies. But I really mean that because I really feel like after watching part 2, this really could have been condensed to one movie because part 2 is basically the third act of this story in which it's basically the climax. And even just now in this movie, part 2, at the 11th hour, we're just now getting character backstories. And it's just like a little too late. Not great. I'm not saying they can't do that in a part 2. It's just they didn't give us enough in that first film to care in this movie. So that when they do tell their backstories, you're just like, okay. Now, Zack Snyder, I mean, as I said in my first review, I'm not a Zack Snyder hater. He's made movies I've liked. He's made movies I thought were decent at best. He's made movies that were divisive and made movies I thought were complete, utter dog shit. It was Sucker Punch for a long time, but now it is Rebel Moon Part 1. And honestly, this duology of Rebel Moon, it's really the worst thing Zack Snyder has made, in my opinion. Now, I will put this over the first film, but honestly, just overall, I just did not care for this Rebel Moon series. And like I said, the action was decent. The slow-mos were fun to look at, but at the same time, it was just slow-mo overload. Slow-mos of unnecessary things like grain. And I really mean that. There is some shots where they are on a farm and they are harvesting grain, and it was just too many to keep up with. And I'm like, oh, yo, what are we doing here? And like I said, the issues I had with the first movie carried on into this movie, in which this movie just borrows heavily from other films like Dune, Star Wars, and Seven Samurai, in which Star Wars is already borrowing from Seven Samurai, but the difference here is it is piss poor. Sophia Boutella, she's fine. Some of the other actors in this movie, like Diamond Hansu, who plays Titus, I mean, again, he's fine. Ray Fisher, he was the only standout to me, but that's only because I just want to see Ray Fisher win after DC and Warner Brothers did him dirty. All of Zack Snyder's worst tendencies are in this film. Somebody needs to tell Zack Snyder that less is more. And speaking of more, Zack Snyder, he does a lot of things within these two movies I didn't even realize. Not only he's the director, not only did he wrote this, not only did he produce this, but he's also the cinematographer. And it's just, this is an issue I have with Tyler Perry, is he just wants to do everything. And Zack Snyder, he wanted to do everything himself, which is an admirable thing to do, but still, it's like, you can't have your hands on everything. Now, in the end, like I said, I enjoyed part 2 more than I did part 1, but the experience as a whole is just not good. Now, honestly, I'm curious to see what Zack Snyder does next, but hopefully it's not another Rebel Moon movie because they do tease at the end of this movie that there is more to come, which is a big sin that any movie can do, which is try to set up other movies instead of focusing on the movie that's in front of you first. You spend too much time trying to build up a universe and a series that you forget all about the story that's in front of you. And I am not buying it. I gave the first film an angry face emoji, so now I'm going to give Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, the angry face emoji. And now that I've officially seen every single film Zack Snyder has ever made, here is how I rank all of his films, courtesy of Letterboxd. Be sure to follow me on there, at Lassiter Factor, no space, uppercase on the first letter of both of those words. And like I said, Rebel Moon Parts 1 and 2 are the worst films Zack Snyder has ever made, in my opinion. That they're at the bottom of this ranking. Because despite the fact that for a long time I thought Sucker Punch was the worst movie Zack Snyder ever made, at least that movie has some stunning visuals, cool action, and several beautiful women to look at. Whereas with this, I feel like this was made by AI. and I wouldn't be surprised if it was, and that would be a new low for Zack Snyder.